important for us. So this company is a family company. So our CEO or former CEO Helmut Diers was the founder of the company. He's still around. His sons are now running the company, and many of the employees have been working with Diers for more than 15 years. So we normally tend to have a rather, well, cooperative relationship to our clients. So we also don't want to use that term of a customer very often. So for us, it's you are the users of our systems, and so that's how we think, and that's what drives us also. So in that terms, we had some talks these days where we also talked about, well, there are some parameters, some values that we can get out of the system, but what about maybe another parameter that's completely related to something that you already do? So these are clinical ideas that we will be happy to receive from you in order to let the system still grow, even if it's been a system that has been on the market for more than 30 years now. So that's basically the about us. So I don't want to read this again because this is what I introduced you to already. So if I just put this into some numbers. So DIERS has been on the market 30 years already. So entering the first product to the clinical market in 1996. So we have around 30 permanent employees. We have sales partnerships around the world. So that ranges from Southeast Asia to South America to North America. So there's a lot of sales partners there as well. We have a lot of scientific cooperation partners. Very vast part of our daily life is actually working on funded projects together with scientific cooperation partners and universities that are developing new concepts on the system, or using the system, or maybe even enhancing the system. Right now we are approaching approximately 2,000 systems installed on the market already. So half of them would be installed in Germany, the other half of it worldwide, fully certified according to MDR and FDA. So should be easy to integrate to every clinical healthcare market. Well, as for the product portfolio, you learned a lot over the last days. So we tried to integrate all of the products. So either it was the 4D Motion Lab, we had some words about the running analysis. In the breakout sessions, you got to know the MyoLine, the EMG system, the free-to-move system. That's basically it. And then, of course, it all starts with the spinometry, because this was the very first system well, without the spinometry, DIERS wouldn't be here, and you wouldn't be here as well. So then we have the leg axis, we have the foot pressure measurement, we have MyoLine, we have all of that in dynamics. And basically, this sequence, so spinometry, leg axis, foot pressure, MyoLine, then moving on to the motion. So that is already a bit of a sequence how the system evolved over the years, actually. Then we can also speak about the surface EMG. So sensor-based, so that's, well, a lot of development in the last couple of years has been focused on sensor systems, so not only the optical-based systems, so we talk about camera-based systems and leg axis and 4D motion, but also a sensor that is detecting, well, movement, maybe muscular activity, and then transferring it to the computer and relating it again to an optical system, like you see it here in some treadmill-based gait analysis. Now, for those of you who have been participating in the first day, you know that slide. So that is more like the timeline in a very rough description. So the first market entry in '96 turned out to be a fully static full metric system in which we had just that one very image in that we took, and so we analyzed in the very early years. It took nearly 20 minutes to process such a sample, and then we got our spinal model. Of course, this has some flaws in it, because if I'm talking just about a single image, I will not pay respect to body sway or breathing, so that could alter the posture, and therefore giving you some differences in and before and after measurement that you want to exclude. That's where then in the mid-2000s we implemented the averaging mode into it. That means we have a full sequence of 6 seconds of samples that we take, and those images get analyzed one by the other, and then we can calculate each image in a postural way, so we get posture parameters for each of the 12 images that we take, and can build average values on this. Then we can select one image out of the sample that is representing the average the very best, and that should enhance the reproducibility of your measurements by a very high degree. So this is what entered the market in the mid-2000s. From there, we started implementing new hardware. So the averaging is just a software mode, isn't it? So then, but we implemented new hardware. So we moved on to pedobarography, integrating this, and also offering simultaneous measurements between spine and foot pressure. Then we moved to a dynamic approach. So that means the 4D posture. So I'm not talking about a single spine scan anymore, and how this posture is showing up, but it's about how posture is changing over time. So in pediatrics, this will be done just with the Matthias test, lifting the arms into horizontal and see how I go into a deviation and maybe a backward reclination. That could also be maybe a one-leg stance, and you just see how your patient will be able to maintain stable on his one foot. That can be done maybe with a hip flexion test. So just imagine putting 2 markers on the PSIS, then lifting one leg up to the horizontal, and see whether your sacroiliac joint is able to provide you with this kind of movement, or is it just blocked and fixed, and then it will just turn against it, and then you will see the deviation in terms of a coronal imbalance. So that was the 4D posture. So already a dynamically oriented examination type, which then developed into the 4D motion. So in 2011, there was a funded project ready that took care of, examining and researching whether the principles that we are using for a static sample with a straight back perpendicular oriented towards the camera can be used also for a moving subject. That was in 2011, and pretty soon, so this is more the time when I joined the company actually, there was a leg axis included, and this all came to the 4D Motion Lab. So the 4D Motion Lab is already a 15-year-old system, if we talk about this. And in 2019, we expanded that range and moved on to the running analysis, which was not more than just, let's say, if you put it into simple words, it's a larger system with the same constellation as a motion lab, but with higher sample rates, and that allows for running analysis. So that's basically the high-performance lab. Behind the curtains, there was some more work to do with that, and we're still working on it. So now we have installed one system to a German customer who is known as, the German Pope of running analysis. So very well known in the German-speaking medical field, and now we're very proud that we have installed a high-performance lab there. But first thing he did, it was just, this is just all nice what you have, but parts of it are really crap, so we need to redo. So that was part of the sales process to just steer the development team towards those individual needs. And the 4-point model that I showed you yesterday was one of the extracts of that. So A glimpse into the future will probably force us to rethink a bit our development activities because, well, as for hardware solutions, we're already there. So there's so much that we can already see and so much that we can measure, but what about the logic behind those measurements? So would we be able to detect a postural asymmetry that we can relate to a certain diagnosis or a certain fixed compensation? Can we maybe enhance the model that we have already? So then we would talk about a spine model which integrates a pelvis, or maybe we are moving into a complete 3D analysis, so that also includes the legs. So that's something where we don't necessarily need new hardware for it, but we need new software solutions. And that's what we are currently working on, creating logics for relating measurement findings to therapeutic consequences. Now jumping back to the starting point. So we talk about the late 1970s and the early 1980s where, well, we started the entire journey. So this is way before 1996, so no system was available for that. So the only system that was roughly comparable was a Moray topography or topogram that we used as an alternative for an X-ray when it comes to postural analysis. So the problem was, we need some follow-up in scoliosis patients, don't we? So we want to see the progression of the disease, which, of course, on one hand, is dedicated to the morphology, but on the other hand, it is also just simply related to the posture progression. So we want to see how maybe a spinal curvature evolves over time. But then, in the mid and late 1970s, there were several studies that suddenly found out, were very surprising, that a higher exposure to X-ray and X-ray radiation will increase some other risks in the human body. And if I'm talking about scoliosis patients, we're normally talking about, well, female adolescents. So we're talking about, growing breast structure. And if you now imagine just a patient standing in front of a radiograph, and then the radiation always is oriented towards that growing breast soft tissue. So then this is exactly where we can tell that the long-term risk of breast cancer in scoliosis patients is a lot higher than on the average population. And that's what led to a rethinking, and we now need to see what can we do about it. We want to have a postural analysis, so it's not about the bone, so we don't need the bone to see in order to judge about the posture. So that's where we need to have alternative methods. So this was the starting point. Helmut DIERS, our first CEO, was not even thinking about DIERS at that time. So he was occupied at Philips, and as some of you know, so he was working in the radiographic field. So he is an expert in radiography, actually. So he's an engineer, and he knows by heart how such a radiograph is actually working, how it's constructed, and how it's calculating and all of that stuff. So that was 1980, and then there was some demands that we just need to enter to the clinical market. So it must be fast, it must be easy to handle, contactless, because we don't want to alter the posture of a patient. We don't want to hold the patient at a certain position, but we want to have him standing just there. And of course, it needs to be radiation-free, of course. That's the main topic. We want to reduce radiation exposure, don't we? So that would be the requirements for technology from a clinical perspective. And from a logical point of view, that would be the engineer that is speaking. So then we have a standing position in a neutral way. So that is already a difference to a radiograph. Just imagine how you measure a kyphosis angle if you have a radiograph. So you're obliged to move everything away from the radiation that is possible. That means your arms are not supposed to hang like this. but they need to be elevated like this or even like this. So that will alter your posture severely, and then, well, we don't have a neutral position anymore. So is this somehow comparable? Of course, if you're performing an X-ray all the time to judge on the sagittal profile, it will always be like this. So then it's comparable again. So that's no big issue. But if you want to somehow have a higher frequency of postural tracking, so then that radiation exposure is not worth the effort, actually. And we need short exposure times, so in order to, well, see how we can, well, take care on body sway, on movement artifacts. So that's basically the engineer's point of view. And you see we're already progressing in the timeline from 1980 to 1982. So this has been done by the University of Münster in northwest Germany. So the biomechanics over there did a great work. So actually biomechanics more in, not from the sports scientist's way, but more in relation to the engineer's way. So if you read those early publications from them, so it's really a hell in mathematics. So therefore, that was still all on the university level at that case, in research level at that time. So as for the principle, the engineers thought about integrating already known concepts. So on a moire topography, you use two cameras that are pointing at an object and simulating two eyes, and therefore creating a 3D surface. So by two cameras, we are requiring a lot of space in order to have a good angle towards the subject. So that's something that we don't want. So therefore, we are using that stripe projection. The stripe projection is actually the second eye. So we have a camera on top and we have a stripe projection below that. All of that comes in a fixed distance of the camera towards every measurement point on the stripe projection and a fixed angle to it. So we know how to calibrate the system. So this is done just behind that wall. So every measurement device that we sell will first be calibrated exactly onto this. And if this is the calibration wall, we can tell for every measurement point on the stripe projection where it is captured on the camera board. And so that gives us a first 3D circumference in which we can then implement our patient as a surface metric. Now if we just break this down to just one of the 50,000 measurement points, so this is where that measurement point would be located, and this is also where our camera board has a firm X and Y pixel in which that point gets detected. Now if I'm having my patient standing at this position, that point is not there anymore, but it's there. So therefore, it just gets captured by a different camera pixel. So we have some kind of relocation of that point. And so this is, these are so many values that we already know. So we know about the distance, the angle, the actual point, and we know about the displacement of that actual point in the camera board, that we are able to calculate everything that is missing in order to get us a 3D coordinate of this very point. Now multiply this by 50,000, you will end up in that point cloud of surface points. And sounds a bit complex, but in the very end it's just about accuracy and how accurate are we able to visualize the spinal model, or not the spinal model but the surface model in the first hand. So our stripe projection has actually not 80 but 81 lines, so that we have one middle line and 40 on top and below it, which consists of 56,000 measurement points actually. And if it comes to accuracy, this is actually the accuracy of the location of each of the surface points. So 0.1 to 0.2 millimeters in X and Y plane and 0.3 millimeters in the depth. So that's basically how accurate we can calculate one measurement point to its actual location on the back profile of the patient. Now then, we have 50,000 of those, we can put those together, and that will give us that surface reconstructions. We're not talking about the spine model right now. So it's just about that surface, that imprint of the upper body surface, which we can represent in different varieties. And well, that's basically surface topography. That's how it's called from a technical way, or like the engineer said, video raster stereography. So a very uncommon word, and very full of letters. So normally in the international field we just call it spinometry. There you go. So now we go on to the late 80s, and we see that there is some more going on. We want to transfer the surface topography image to a spine model. This is where we start with a symmetry model. So the symmetry model demands that our surface point, which has the function to build two symmetric parts of that stripe that is projected onto the back, will be able to tell about the symmetry at that level. So that means if I have several levels of a symmetry point, with a symmetry point, we can add the symmetry line to it. The symmetry line then shows one right part of the upper body and one left part of the upper body, and both will be mathematically symmetrical, not visually. So that's really something, especially when we talk about scoliosis, never be visually symmetrical. Just by calculation, you can tell that that stripe projection has a symmetrical left and a right part, and in the middle you have the symmetry line. And that symmetry line is always reflecting the symmetry of the upper body, of course, and the upper body symmetry is always deeply related to the orientation of the spinous processes of the vertebral column. Therefore, if I'm talking about 3D data that we render, we already have an information about the run of, or the orientation of the spinous processes in all three planes, from level to level of the stripe projection. The only thing that we now need would be some reference to the upper body of the patient. So this reference will be the bony landmarks. So that's, in the first day I spent a lot of time about explaining the blue concavities, the red convexity, and the localization of those points, and maybe correcting those. But basically, we have those two lumbar dimple points as a local concavity on the surface, and we have the spinous process of C7 as a local convexity, representing three bony landmarks that build up a triangle, one to the other, that allows us to print in the spinal model according to the anatomy of a patient. So we know that this point needs to be C7 because this is the one that we're referring to actually. If we talk about the lumbar dimples, you will have a distance between that dimple and that dimple, which is normally equal to the distance of the sacrum point towards L3. So this is a diamond that has been described in the literature, and therefore the dimples allow us to locate L3, and we have a C7, we have an L3, we can add L4 below it according to the valuation, but we can also implement all other segments within the space of C7 and L3. So that's basically done just by modulation. Now, as you can imagine, so you saw it in brackets, scientifically proven, so that is of course not a must, but it is desirable in order to also prove that the system is measuring what it is supposed to measure. There have been various studies on accuracy, on reliability, on comparison against an X-ray, against an MRI, against some systems, and well, this is just a short extract of this. So if I'm talking about all of the, well, scientifically evaluation related publications, I'm talking about approximately 50 publications overall. So the very last bigger study that has been published, well, dates back to I think 24, 23, where we had a good comparison, with the EOS system, for example, and well, then that's basically also given. So the scientific field is also covered there. And if I'm talking about reproducibility, this is what you would expect as reproducibility. So we want to repeat 3 examinations. So you can see that has been done at 1:45, at 2:30, and at 3:05. So these were the times in which that subject has been measured. And that should be all the same graphical expressions. So that is reproducibility, actually, that we want to see. We don't want to somehow mess around with questions on whether this is now accurate or not, or maybe I have another measurement and this is not really matching to the first one. So we want to have it as reproducible as possible. So this is actually where the 40 average is the very one measurement examination type that you want to have, because that is guaranteeing you that kind of level of repeatability. Only if you are measuring patients that are a bit more in motion. So let's talk about pediatrics, for example. So having a child in front of the system, measuring 6 seconds, sometimes a very hard task, because then something up there, or maybe like this, or maybe moving like that. It's just a random movement, which of course will impair the accuracy of the repeatability of the calculations. So therefore, we never removed the 3D static examination type from the system in order to give you also an option to measure a patient that is not able to stand still for 6 seconds. Now, as for the clinical application point, we talk about, 4 basic points, which I already introduced in the very first session. It's just about posture recording in the first end, but then also about therapy evaluation, about follow-up measurements, and what we also discussed would be the reaction diagnostics. But what about movement? So we do only talk about statics, but what about a function analysis? What about movement patterns, surface analysis under dynamic conditions? And of course, again, radiation-free. We already have a radiation-free spinometry measurement, so are we able to somehow record the dynamic posture as well? So it dates back to 2004. So a funding project funded by the European Union, which took place in DIERS in the city of Tübingen in southern Germany, and in the University of Leuven in Belgium, which was all about the application of the principles of a static spinometry on a moving subject. Now, of course, we want to see the spinal motion in the spine in motion. So with all of the postural parameters in movement, it should again be easy to handle, and of course have also matched some lower space requirements. So far, we've only sold static devices, and that would require maybe 3 meters in length and maybe 1.5 meters in depth. Maybe the smallest room I've ever been for training was even smaller than that. And that's those space requirements should also match for such a system. But then, of course, we need to take care of the subject not moving too far away from the measurement device. That's where the treadmill came in. So because we need to guarantee that the distance is always more or less the same and within a certain acceptable range. Now, if we have a treadmill added to the system, then it's pure logic to also integrate a pressure plate, isn't it? So then we can just use a 1 meter walking ground and equip it with a pressure plate. Then we can integrate this as we did it in the static version of the system as well. then we can relate the entire movement of the spine, which is very complex if you just look at the spinal movement by itself. But if we can relate it to the foot pressure distribution, we have a good understanding on how the spine is moving in relation to the gait cycle. So what we discussed yesterday afternoon. And then we need to close the gap, so that is the DIERS leg axis. So then it's a camera-based video gait analysis system, two-dimensional, no three dimensions, but still we have a good way of, well, closing the gap between the foot pressure distribution and the spinal motion, the pelvis motion, and add the leg axis kinematics to it. If you ever wondered why these images are colorless, it's just about file size actually. So a black and white image or some gray shaded image is always way smaller than a colored image, because a color is always built up by 3 other colors. So then you have 3 times the file size for one JPEG image that you save. So that was just, well, some pragmatic approach actually. And so, if closing the gap with the DIERS leg axis, we have a dynamic spine, we have a pressure plate, and we have a video gait analysis. That's what we call the 4D motion lab. Again, we talk about scientific publications that are dealing with the system. So as for the 4D motion, we are currently at around about 40-45 scientific publications that actually, interestingly, did not start just right from 2004, but maybe range back to the last 5 years to really, where the system really got going also in a scientific environment. So, in a motion lab, we talk about a static examination. Actually, this patient we talked about yesterday as well. So then we have our patient with the markers on the socks, if you remember. We have a dynamic one. So why is the video running? So I'm not sure. So do I need to click? No, I don't. I'm not able to click it. So let's see. Can I somehow? Ah, there we go. Now it's dynamic, isn't it? So that's all that, together with the movement excursion over time. And then we start thinking further on. So because then the motion lab was ready, we were able to add some more software tweaks to it. So we'll learn about those software tweaks later on. And then there was already some drive towards, well, sensory function and sensory information about, for example, the electromyography, putting the sensors to the skin. You see the electrodes just here put to the vastus lateralis. We have a reference point at the lateral knee joint, and then we can measure the muscular activity that comes up to the surface, measured by the sensors themselves. Now, as for the motion lab, coming back to the motion lab, so then we have a general restriction. So you have a sample rate of 60 Hertz. You have an image exposure. So that means how long do I open the shutter to get the image brightened up? That's 8 to 16 milliseconds. And we have a security space. That's the space that you have behind the treadmill that enables the patient, if he falls, to fall to the floor, but not against any device that's standing behind it. That needs to be 2 meters. But on a running subject, if you think about someone running at 20 kilometers an hour on a regular motion lab, falling, then he will fall to the ground and be catapulted against the device. So that's something we need to consider. And on 2 meters security space, this is actually not given. And as for camera frequency, this is what you end up when somebody is running on a motion lab, probably. So if there's much up and down movement, so this is your spinal model that you get. So that really gets you a lot of movement artifacts, a lot of outliers that are not representative for the motion pattern of the patient. So at 60 Hertz sample rate, we are missing crucial data of the movement pattern. At 60 Hertz and 16 milliseconds, the stripe projection starts getting blurry. The markers will start getting blurry. So we don't talk about a circular shaped marker anymore, but it's like more like an egg-shaped or like an ellipsoid shaped marker reflection, where we are not able to track the correct center anymore. So this is where the outliers really come up to the surface. And that's where we talk about the high performance labs. So you see it on the photo, you can also look to your right, so that's the high performance lab. So we talk about a sample rate of 240 Hertz. So we have multiplied the regular frequency by 4. We have an image exposure of only 4 milliseconds. So also there decreased the shutter opening very much, and we have a security space of 3 instead of 2 meters. So that therefore the patient is able to would be able to fall but not crash into the system anymore. And so again, the video is not loading. So it's apparently mixed something up in the preparation, let's say. And so that will give us also the option to use the system in running. Now, for those of you who in the first day took part in the breakout of the DIERS free to move, so that would be again the turn towards the sensor-based systems. So we have some sensors placed to the patient. These are inertial measurement units. We will calibrate the units, and then we can track any motion free from the treadmill. So we are not required to have the patient walk on the treadmill. That can be any movement. In that case, we have a golf player captured here, and you can see the avatar moving along here and giving us all of the kinematics that might be needed. So if I'm talking about maybe an increased rotation that you need in your shoulder girdle, and that would be something that the system can perfectly give you. A motion lab would not be able to do that. Now, we took care of enhancing this product to a rather meaningful one. So therefore, we equipped the entire software with, test protocols, which go for functional movement tests, more related to the functional movement screen, actually, from their content. There are some jump test batteries, so the entire list is all one of the jump tests that get evaluated automatically. So we can see how the movement was exerted or executed, and we can evaluate the kinematics behind this and see whether there's something going the wrong way, then the test would not be passed. And we can then correlate this to a functional deviation that leads us to an exercise that the patient can perform in order to improve the situation, and then we can repeat the test. All of these tests can also be done as a return to sports test battery. This is a classical one that has been defined, at least for the German market, like this, with always a qualitative test in the first stand, where we just judge the quality of a jump or of a movement, and then another test that is more the quantifier. So the easiest sample would be in the first stand if you have maybe an ACL patient and you want to judge whether this patient can be enabled to exercise on full load. He should be able to perform a one-leg balance squat to 45 degrees without moving to a valgus knee or without tilting the trunk too much. So that would be the first qualitative sign and the first test in the routine. And when you proceed to the quantitative test, you perform a Y-balance test. So standing there, reaching to the front, reaching posterolateral medial, and taking the distances. And if they match your leg length, then your test is passed. can include a gate analysis to it, so with an automatic detection of the gate faces and the kinematics related to the gate faces. We saw that yesterday in the Perry presentation. So we have a terminal stance and a certain hip extension of 20 degrees, so then we can see this value right here just by the automatic acquisition. And at the last thing, I just want to talk about the game changer, which is the leg axis AI, so the markerless leg axis. So in the German market, we've sold it this year only, so it's nothing that we sold that much longer, but already our Motion Lab clients are really happy to have it, because if we talk about the early years and the Motion Lab, and I don't want to waste my time in putting the markers, that was my only option. So I can have that nude leg and have a pure subjective analyzation. Now, if I transfer this to a markerless, so then just based on the contour of the leg, the axis can be detected in a very stable and a very accurate way compared to the marker-based. So right now, this is, as for the accuracy that I can tell you, is just based on the internal proceedings that we have on this. In this month, we handed over the entire module also to one of the partner universities, and they will take care of the official evaluation of the system on a scientific field. There we go. So this is more or less the process. So start your capturing, choose the AI function, hit the record button. Then the data gets captured, gets transferred. You start your processing, do not click to anything, and after a short time, your axis will appear. And if needed, you can correct, but you don't have to normally, and then you end up in your result page. So it's a very quick and a very reasonable process, actually. So, and if we talk just about the entire product range, so that's more or less it. So there are some software solutions as well related to the therapy proposals. These are all, this is all that lower part of these brackets. And this is what we're currently working on, integrating more therapeutic consequences to the system that drops us the data anyway. So we don't want to have more data, we just want to make use of the data in a certain way. So if you have any ideas on that, we will be happy to discuss and maybe find a way to include that model if there is some good point in actually advertising it.